TACOMA Narrows Bridge. In 1938, the U.S. government approved funding for a brand new suspension bridge in Washington state. It would connect Tacoma to the Kitsap Peninsula, spanning the Puget Sound. Engineers were excited. At the time, it would be the third longest suspension bridge in the world. The designer was Leon Moisseiff, one of the most respected bridge engineers in the country, the man who helped design the Golden Gate Bridge. His plan was bold: make it as thin, light, and flexible as possible. It looked stunning. People called it the most beautiful bridge ever built. It opened on July 1st, 1940. Everybody celebrated. 4 months later, it was gone. On the morning of November 7th, 1940, winds of around 42 miles per hour started blowing across the Narrows. Nothing unusual, except the bridge started moving, not just swaying. It was twisting, violently. The entire roadway began rippling like a ribbon in the wind. A man named Leonard Coatsworth was driving across with his daughter's dog when the bridge began to tilt sideways. He abandoned his car and crawled on his hands and knees to safety. The dog didn't make it. It was the only casualty. By 11:10 a.m., the center span crumbled into the Puget Sound. The whole thing was gone in minutes. What Moisseiff had not accounted for was something called torsional flutter, a phenomenon where wind and the bridge's own structure synchronized to create a self-amplifying vibration. The more it moved, the worse it got, until it destroyed itself. The government had spent $6.4 million on a bridge that lasted exactly 4 months and 6 days. The wreckage still sits at the bottom of Puget Sound to this day. It's now one of the largest artificial reefs in the world. The SPRUCE GOOSE. In 1942, German submarines were destroying Allied supply ships in the Atlantic at a devastating rate. The US government needed a solution, so they commissioned the biggest plane ever built, something so massive it could fly troops and supplies safely above the submarines below. They gave the contract to Howard Hughes. He was given $18 million in government funds and 2 years to deliver. There was one rule: no aluminum or steel. Both were needed for the war effort. He had to build the largest aircraft in history entirely out of wood. Hughes agreed. The war ended in 1945. Hughes was still building. By 1947, 5 years after the contract, Congress had had enough. They hauled Hughes before a Senate hearing. Senator Owen Brewster stood up and declared, "The Spruce Goose is a flying lumberyard and will never fly." Hughes stared him down and said, "The Hercules was a monumental undertaking. It is the largest aircraft ever built. It is not a lumberyard." Then he walked out of that hearing, drove to Long Beach Harbor, climbed into the cockpit, and flew it. On November 2nd, 1947, the Hughes H-4 Hercules lifted off the water, flew 1 mile at an altitude of 70 feet, and landed. The entire flight lasted 26 seconds. It never flew again. Hughes locked it in a climate-controlled hangar and spent millions of his own money keeping it in flight-ready condition until the day he died in 1976. The plane still holds the world record for the largest wingspan of any aircraft ever built. It flew once for 26 seconds and cost the US government $22 million in taxpayer money. The Concorde. In 1962, Britain and France signed an agreement to build something that had never existed before: a commercial passenger jet that could fly faster than the speed of sound, twice as fast, to be exact. The plan was extraordinary. London to New York in under 3.5 hours. The project was called Concorde. It took 14 years. It cost $9 billion to develop. By the time it entered service in 1976, airlines had ordered 74 aircraft. Then orders collapsed. In the end, only 14 were ever used commercially, all by British Airways and Air France, because a problem nobody fully appreciated had appeared: the sonic boom. When Concorde broke the sound barrier, it produced a massive shockwave that hit the ground like a thunderclap. The US banned supersonic overland flights entirely. That immediately eliminated most of the world's profitable routes. Concorde was now restricted almost entirely to crossing the Atlantic, and a round-trip ticket between London and New York costs around $10,000. Only the ultra-wealthy could afford it. Then, on July 25, 2000, Air France Flight 4590 took off from Paris and never landed. A piece of debris on the runway punctured a tire. The rubber shredded and ruptured a fuel tank. The plane caught fire in the air and crashed, killing all 113 people on board. Concorde returned to service after safety upgrades, but the public never trusted it again. In 2003, both British Airways and Air France retired their entire fleet. Supersonic passenger travel ended that day. The Soviet N-1 moon rocket. In the 1960s, the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union was at its peak. America had the Saturn V. The Soviets needed something just as powerful, so they built the N-1, a 344-foot rocket designed to carry cosmonauts to the moon. There was one serious problem. The chief rocket engineer of the Soviet program, Sergei Korolev, died unexpectedly in 1966. The man who held the entire program together was gone. The N-1 was passed to a new engineer, Vasily Mishin, who inherited a rocket full of unresolved technical problems and political pressure to deliver. The first launch attempt was on February 21, 1969. The rocket made it 69 seconds before its engines shut down and it crashed. The second attempt was July 3, 1969, just 13 days before Apollo 11 launched. The N-1 lifted off from Baikonur. A single loose bolt was sucked into an oxygen pump. One engine exploded, then another. Then the chain reaction hit all 30 engines simultaneously. The rocket climbed 200 meters, tilted, and fell back onto its own launch pad. What followed was one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in human history, equivalent to 7 kilotons of TNT. The launch pad was completely destroyed. The Soviet government immediately classified the entire event and hid it from the world for 20 years. Apollo 11 landed on the moon 17 days later. The Soviets launched the N-1 two more times. Both failed. In 1974, after 4 consecutive explosions, the program was cancelled. The Soviet Union never reached the moon. The total cost of the program is billions of rubles. The ARAL Sea project. In the 1950s, the Soviet government had a plan. The deserts of Central Asia, modern-day Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, could be turned into massive cotton fields. All they had to do was redirect 2 major rivers, the Amu Darya and the Sur Darya, to irrigate the land. The plan worked in a way. Uzbekistan briefly became the world's largest exporter of cotton. But there was something those rivers had been feeding for thousands of years. The Aral Sea was once the 4th largest lake in the entire world, covering 26,000 square miles, the size of the state of West Virginia. With both rivers now diverted, the lake had almost no water flowing into it. It started shrinking. Slowly at first, then faster. By 1987, it had split into 2 separate bodies of water. By the 1990s, it had shrunk by 60% in volume. Fishing towns that once sat on the shoreline were now sitting in the middle of a desert, surrounded by rusting ships stranded on dry land. The water that remained became so salty it was toxic. The fishing industry collapsed completely, an industry that had fed millions of people and employed tens of thousands. The exposed seabed turned into salt flats laced with pesticides and fertilizer. Winds picked up the toxic dust and spread it across the region. The United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon visited in 2010 and called it one of the planet's worst environmental disasters. Today, the southern part of the Aral Sea has almost entirely disappeared. Berlin-Brandenburg Airport. Germany has a reputation: engineering excellence, precision and efficiency, everything on time. Then there is the Berlin-Brandenburg Airport. In 2006, the German government began construction on a brand new international airport for the capital. It was designed to be a showpiece, modern, efficient, environmentally friendly, and capable of handling 27 million passengers per year. The plan was simple. Opened in 2011, budget €2 billion. In 2011, they announced it wasn't ready. New opening date, 2012, then 2013, then 2014, then 2017. The opening was postponed 7 times. The reason changed with every delay. The fire safety system didn't work. Cables were laid without documentation. The smoke extraction system required a complete redesign. Escalators were the wrong size. There weren't enough electrical outlets for passengers. The budget went from €2 billion to over €7 billion. The delays were costing German taxpayers approximately €1 million every single day. German newspaper Bild ran the headline, "What a disgrace! The capital is showing the entire country." The airport finally opened on October 31, 2020, 9 years late, during a global pandemic. With almost no passengers and no flights, the company immediately posted a loss of over $1 billion. California High-Speed Rail. In 2008, California voters approved a ballot measure to build a high-speed rail line connecting Los Angeles and San Francisco. The promise was clear: trains traveling at up to 220 miles per hour, making the trip in under 3 hours. A modern transportation system for the most populous state in America. The estimated cost in 2008 was $33 billion. The projected completion date was 2020. Here is where the story goes wrong. The cost started climbing immediately. By 2012, the estimate had risen to $68 billion. By 2018, it was $77 billion. Today, the total projected cost has exceeded $100 billion, more than 3 times the original estimate. The completion date has been pushed back repeatedly. As of now, not a single mile of high-speed track between LA and San Francisco is operational. The only section under active construction is a 119-mile stretch through California's Central Valley, a rural corridor connecting the cities of Merced and Bakersfield, cities that no one was originally building this railroad to connect. If you enjoyed this, subscribe and drop your idea for the next one in the comments.